Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, your host, and today we're going to do a deep dive into a topic that is super important for better communication.
Okay.
Active listening. We've got a true expert in communication with us today. Sarah, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Mike. Happy to be here.
Now, I think we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
You're talking to someone and you just know they're not really listening.
Yeah.
Like their eyes are glazed over or they're just waiting to jump in with their response before you've even finished your thought. It's like talking to a brick wall. But, active listening, it's about way more than just hearing the words.
Right.
It's about really understanding the speaker's full message, their feelings, their intentions, even the stuff they're not saying. So, Sarah, can you break that down for us a bit? What is active listening and why is it so important?
You're spot on, Mike. It's a whole different thing than just passively listening to words. It's about really being present and engaged with the person who's talking, not just waiting for your chance to jump in. It's about getting their message on all those levels. The words, of course, but also the emotions behind them, their body language, even their unspoken intentions. Like you're tuning into their whole being, not just their words. And it's so important for so many reasons, Mike. For one thing, it's like the foundation of any strong relationship, When you actually practice active listening, you build that trust and respect with the other person. It shows them that you genuinely care about what they have to say, and you're really trying to understand their point of view. And that can make a huge difference, avoiding conflicts, building a good connection, and making your relationships with the people around you even stronger.
It really can. And it's not just personal relationships either, right?
No, not at all.
It's super important for work, too. Think about it. When you're in a meeting or you're negotiating something or even just pitching an idea to your boss, being a good listener can really set you apart. It helps you get the information you need, understand everyone's point of view, and respond thoughtfully. Those are all such key skills for leadership and collaboration and, just being good at solving problems.
For sure. And it's funny because a lot of people just assume that listening is something we do naturally.
Yeah.
But being an active listener, it's a skill, something you can actually work on and get better at. It's like learning a language or playing a musical instrument. The more you practice, the better you get.
It's so true. And I remember when I first learned about active listening, I was blown away by this stat. Did you know that the average person only remembers like 25% what they hear after 2 months?
Really?
75% just goes in one ear and out the other.
Wow, that's wild. But it makes sense, right? When we really engage with information, when we consciously make that effort to listen and process it, our brains hold on to it better. Active listening techniques actually activate more areas of our brains.
Oh, interesting.
Which helps with memory and understanding. It's like giving your brain a workout. And we're not just talking about words here either. Remember, body language and all those nonverbal cues are a huge part of communication. Some research even suggests that over 65% of what we communicate isn't even spoken.
Wow. So if most of what we're communicating isn't even in the words themselves, active listening has to be about way more than just what we hear.
Exactly.
You've got to pay attention to the speaker's whole presence, their energy, everything.
Exactly. We need to be tuned in to all those subtle signals the speaker is giving us, both verbal and nonverbal. Their facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, even how they're using their hands. All those things give us these little insights into what they're really feeling and what they mean. It's like reading between the lines of the conversation.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do this? How do we get better at active listening? What are some things we can do?
That's the million-dollar question, right? The good news is anyone can improve their active listening skills. It's about being intentional about it and practicing.
Yeah.
And like any skill, the more you do it, the more natural it becomes.
Right.
So let's dive into some of those essential techniques.
Okay, lay it on us. What are your top tips for becoming a better active listener?
Okay, so first off, paying attention. It might seem obvious, but in this world of ours with distractions everywhere, it's actually harder than it sounds.
Oh, yeah.
Put your phone away, turn off those notifications. Find a quiet spot if you can. Make eye contact with the person who's talking and focus on what they're saying. Don't let your mind drift off and try to resist the urge to interrupt or plan what you're going to say next while they're still talking.
Okay, so put the phone down, close the laptop, be present in the moment. I think we could all use a reminder about that sometimes.
Definitely. Next up is showing that you're engaged. It's not enough to just be there.
Yeah.
You have to show the speaker that you're really listening and that you care what they have to say.
Right.
Nod your head, smile at the right moments, use little verbal cues like, or icy to keep them going. It just lets them know you're with them and interested in what they're saying.
So it's like giving them little signals that you're on the same page.
Exactly. Those tiny cues make all the difference. And then there's providing feedback. This is where we take our listening to the next level. To make sure you're really understanding the speaker's message, try putting what you've heard into your own words.
Okay.
Say something like, so what you're saying is, or it sounds like you feel. This not only shows them you're paying attention, but also gives them a chance to make sure you've got it right.
So paraphrasing is like hitting the save button, making sure you've stored the information correctly.
Exactly. It helps both of you make sure you're on the same page. Another great technique is asking open-ended questions. This is about going beyond those simple yes or no questions and really inviting the speaker to go deeper into their thoughts and feelings. Try things like, can you tell me more about that? Or how did that make you feel? These types of questions show real interest and encourage the speaker to open up more.
Those open-ended questions are so important. It gives them the space to really unpack everything instead of just giving a surface-level response.
Absolutely. And maybe the most important one of all is withholding judgment. This means fighting that urge to jump in with solutions or force your opinions on them or give advice they didn't ask for. It's about making a safe space where they can share their thoughts and feelings without being judged or criticized. Sometimes people just need to vent or process their emotions, and the best thing you can do is just listen without trying to fix anything.
That is a big one.
Yeah.
It's so tempting to jump in with advice, especially when we care about the person who's talking.
Yeah.
But sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen with empathy and understanding.
Right.
Without judging. It's about truly seeing things from their perspective, even if we don't necessarily agree with them.
That's it. And that's often where people struggle, especially if they naturally like to problem solve or give advice.
Yeah.
But learning to hold back and just listen without judgment is one of the most valuable gifts you can give someone.
You're so right about that, Sarah. And I think this leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive. I'd love to hear an example of how this works in a real conversation.
Yeah.
Like, how do these techniques actually play out?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share an example. So picture this. Two friends, Lisa and Jody. Lisa's had a fight with her sister, and she's really upset.
Okay.
She calls Jody to talk about it. So Jody's going to use her active listening skills to be there for her friend.
Okay. I can picture this. Lisa's on the phone needing to vent about this family drama, and Jody's there to listen. What happens next?
So imagine Lisa says something like, I just had this huge fight with my sister and I'm so upset. She just blew me off when I tried to talk to her about planning our parents' anniversary party, and now I feel terrible.
Okay, so Lisa is clearly hurt and frustrated. It's Jody's time to shine as an active listener.
Exactly. Instead of jumping in with advice or opinions, Jody starts by simply acknowledging how Lisa's feeling. She might say something like, wow, that sounds really rough. You must be feeling so hurt and angry right now.
Okay, so right away, Jody is showing empathy and validating Lisa's feelings. She's not dismissing the situation or jumping to solutions. She's just letting Lisa know that she hears her and understands.
Yes, exactly. And that's so important. To encourage Lisa to share more, Jody then asks an open-ended question like, can you tell me more about what happened?
Okay.
This gives Lisa the space to explain everything in her own words and work through those emotions.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so tempting to jump in with our own thoughts and advice.
Yeah.
But sometimes the best thing we can do is create that space for the other person to tell their story.
You're spot on. And as Lisa's talking, Jody continues to show that she's engaged by making eye contact, nodding, and using those little verbal cues like and I see to show she's following along.
Right.
These cues are so small but so important. They show Lisa that Jody's present and really listening, even though she's not saying much. They create a sense of connection and support that's crucial in these kinds of conversations. Now, to make sure she's really understanding everything correctly, Jody uses paraphrasing. She might say something like, so it sounds like you're feeling hurt because your sister didn't seem interested in your ideas for the party, and it made you feel like your input wasn't valued.
Perfect. That's paraphrasing in action. It not only shows Lisa that Jody's listening, but it also gives Lisa a chance to correct Jody if she's missed something or misunderstood. This back and forth makes sure they're both on the same page.
Exactly. And that's a good place to take a pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground already. You know, from what active listening is to why it's so important to some of those essential techniques and even how they look in a real conversation.
Yeah, we have.
But we're just getting started. In the next part, we'll dive even deeper into the ins and outs of active listening. We'll explore some more advanced techniques and tackle some of the challenges that come up in those real-world conversations. Can't
wait to hear more. Stay tuned for part 2 of our active listening adventure. Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring the fascinating world of active listening with our expert, Sarah.
Right.
In part one, we talked about what active listening is, why it's so important, but now I'm really keen to get into the how.
Okay.
Sarah, what are some more practical tips and techniques that we can use to really sharpen our listening skills and make those conversations we have every day more meaningful and have more impact?
You're absolutely right, Mike. Knowing the theory is great, but putting it into practice is where the real magic happens. So let's jump right into some more of those actionable strategies that you can start using today. One tip that might sound a bit counterintuitive at first is this. Don't just listen with your ears, listen with your whole body.
Okay.
What I mean by that is pay attention to your posture, your facial expressions, even your breathing. When you're truly engaged in a conversation, your body naturally reflects that. You tend to lean forward slightly, you make eye contact, and your facial expressions mirror the speaker's emotions.
But on the other hand, if you're bored or distracted, you might slouch across your arms or avoid eye contact. It's like your body is speaking a language of its own, and you want to make sure you're sending the right message.
That's such a great point. It's like we're sending these nonverbal signals all the time, whether we realize it or not. So we need to be mindful of our body language and make sure it's aligned with our intention to be present and engaged in the conversation.
Absolutely. And here's another interesting tip. Try to listen between the lines.
Okay.
Often what people don't say is just as important as what they do say. Pay attention to their tone of voice, their pauses, their body language. Are they hesitant to share certain details? Do they seem to be holding back their true feelings? Tuning into these subtle cues can give you valuable insights into the speaker's underlying emotions and intentions.
So it's almost like we're playing detective.
Yes.
Looking for those little clues in the speaker's behavior and trying to piece together the full story. Precisely. Active listening is about more than just taking words at face value. It's about reading between the lines and understanding the deeper meaning behind the message. And sometimes that means paying attention to what's not being said.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about those times when we're in a conversation with someone and we genuinely don't understand what they're trying to say? Maybe they're using jargon that we're not familiar with, or their explanation is just confusing.
Yeah.
What's the best way to handle those situations without interrupting the flow of the conversation or making the speaker feel like we're not paying attention?
That's a common challenge, and it's important to address it in a way that shows respect for the speaker. Instead of just nodding along and pretending you understand, don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions.
Okay.
You could say something like, "I'm not sure I follow you there. Could you explain that a bit more?" Or, "What do you mean by," and then repeat the specific term or phrase that you didn't understand.
So it's better to just pause for a moment and ask for clarification than to just fake it and risk misunderstanding the whole point of the conversation.
Exactly. It's about being honest about your understanding and taking the time to get on the same page as the speaker. And here's another tip for those moments when you need a little extra help processing what you're hearing. Try silently summarizing the speaker's key points in your own words. This helps solidify your understanding and can also help you formulate thoughtful questions or responses later on.
Okay, so it's like we're creating mental bullet points as we listen, highlighting the most important takeaways from the conversation.
Oh no, it's about actively engaging with the information and making it your own.
Yeah.
Now here's a tip that might seem small, but it can make a big difference in how you're perceived as a listener. Avoid finishing the speaker's sentences, even if you think you know where they're going.
Oh.
It can be tempting to jump in and try to speed things up, but it can also make the speaker feel like you're not really listening or that you're more interested in hearing yourself talk.
Oh, I am so guilty of this. Sometimes I think I do it because I'm eager to show that I'm following along and that I understand what they're saying, but I can definitely see how it could backfire and make the speaker feel rushed or cut off.
It's a common mistake, but it's definitely something to be mindful of. When you resist that urge to finish someone's sentence, you're giving them the space to express themselves fully and at their own pace, and that can make a world of difference in how heard and respected they feel.
Okay, that's a great reminder. Now, I'm curious about something. We've talked a lot about the verbal aspects of active listening, but what about the nonverbal side of things? How can we use our body language to show that we're truly listening and engaged?
Excellent question, Mike. Nonverbal communication is just as important as verbal communication, if not more so. It's often the key to building trust, conveying empathy, and creating a sense of connection with the speaker. So let's dive into some specific nonverbal techniques that can elevate your active listening game.
Awesome. I'm ready to take notes.
All right, here's a simple but powerful one. Make eye contact with the speaker. This shows that you're focused on them and interested in what they have to say. But a word of caution, don't stare them down. That can feel intimidating and unnatural. Instead, aim for a comfortable and natural level of eye contact that shows you're present without being overbearing.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where we're making eye contact enough to show we're engaged, but not so much that it feels creepy or uncomfortable.
That's a great way to put it. It's about finding that balance that feels authentic and respectful for both of you. Now, here's another important nonverbal cue. Pay attention to your posture. Sit or stand up straight, but avoid being stiff or formal.
Okay.
Leaning forward slightly can show that you're interested and engaged, while leaning back can signal disinterest or boredom. And whatever you do, avoid crossing your arms.
Got it.
This can create a physical barrier between you and the speaker and make you seem closed off or defensive.
So it's about creating a welcoming and approachable presence with our body language, letting the speaker know that we're open to hearing what they have to say.
Right. It's about creating that sense of safety and trust that allows for open and honest communication. Now, here's a tip that might seem small, but it can actually make a big difference in how you're perceived as a listener. Nod your head occasionally. This simple gesture can go a long way in showing the speaker that you're following along and understanding their message. It's a nonverbal way of saying, yes, I'm with you, or I hear you.
It's like giving those little head nods of encouragement, like we're cheering the speaker on as they share their thoughts and feelings.
Yes, exactly. It's a subtle but effective way to show that you're present and engaged. And while you're at it, don't forget to smile. A genuine smile can create a warm and inviting atmosphere and make the speaker feel more comfortable and at ease. But again, be authentic. Don't force a smile if it doesn't feel natural. A forced smile can actually have the opposite effect and make you seem insincere or dismissive.
So it's all about being mindful of our body language and making sure it's congruent with our intention to be present, respectful, and engaged in the conversation.
Yes.
It's about sending those nonverbal signals that create a sense of connection and trust with the speaker.
You got it, Mike. It's about using our whole selves to listen, not just our ears. Now let's move on to a topic that's often misunderstood when it comes to active listening note-taking.
Okay.
Some people believe that taking notes is a sign of disrespect, or that it means you're not truly listening to the speaker. But that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I've heard that before too. The idea that if you're busy scribbling away in your notebook, you must not be fully present in the conversation.
Right. But here's the thing. Taking notes can actually be a very effective way to enhance your active listening skills. If you're someone who struggles to remember details, taking notes can help you stay focused and retain information more effectively.
So it's like creating a written record of the conversation that we can refer back to later, almost like a mental map of the key points and takeaways.
Precisely. And it can be especially helpful in situations where you need to remember specific details, like in a meeting or a lecture. Now, of course, there's a right way and a wrong way to take notes while still being an active listener.
Right.
The key is to do it in a way that doesn't distract the speaker or make them feel like you're not fully present.
Okay, so how do we strike that balance?
Yeah.
How do we take notes effectively without sacrificing our active listening presence?
Here are a few tips. First, make sure you have the speaker's permission before you start taking notes. A simple, would it be all right if I jot down a few notes, can go a long way in showing respect and consideration. Second, don't try to write down every single word the speaker says. Instead, focus on capturing the key points, main ideas, and any action items or follow-up tasks. And third, make sure your note-taking doesn't interfere with your ability to make eye contact, nod, and use other nonverbal cues to show that you're listening. If you find yourself getting too caught up in writing, pause for a moment, look up at the speaker, and make sure you're still connected.
So it's about being strategic and selective with our note-taking, making sure it's enhancing our listening experience rather than detracting from it.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between capturing the essential information and maintaining that all-important human connection with the speaker.
Well said, Sarah. I think these note-taking tips are incredibly helpful. But before we move on, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the idea of listening between the lines. Can you give us some more specific examples of what kinds of nonverbal cues we should be paying attention to and what they might mean?
Absolutely, Mike. It's like learning a secret code, decoding those subtle signals that people send through their body language and tone of voice. Let's break down some of the most common nonverbal cues and what they might reveal about the speaker's true feelings and intentions.
Okay, ready to crack the code.
Yeah.
What should we be looking for?
First up, we have eye contact. As we mentioned earlier, good eye contact is a sign of engagement and interest. But there's more to it than that. If someone is making strong, steady eye contact, it can also convey confidence, assertiveness, or even a desire to connect on a deeper level.
So strong eye contact can be a good thing. But what about the opposite? What if someone is avoiding eye contact altogether?
That's where things get a little more nuanced. Avoiding eye contact can signal a range of emotions, from shyness or nervousness to discomfort or even dishonesty. It's important to consider the context of the conversation and the speaker's overall demeanor to get a more accurate read on their true feelings.
Okay, so we need to be detectives using all the clues at our disposal to decipher the meaning behind the speaker's nonverbal cues.
Exactly. It's about being attuned to the subtleties of human behavior and understanding that there's not always a one-to-one correspondence between a specific cue and a specific emotion.
Got it. So what other nonverbal cues should we be paying attention to?
Let's talk about facial expressions. These are incredibly powerful indicators of emotion. A genuine smile can convey happiness, warmth, and approachability. A furrowed brow can signal confusion or concern, and a clenched jaw can betray anger or frustration.
So it's about paying attention to those micro expressions, those fleeting facial movements that can reveal a lot about what someone is truly feeling, even if they're trying to mask it.
You're exactly right. Our faces often betray our true emotions, even when we're trying to keep them hidden. And that's why it's so important to be attuned to those subtle facial cues.
Okay, so eye contact and facial expressions, check. What else should we be noticing?
Next up, we have tone of voice. This can be a powerful indicator of emotion and intention. A soft, gentle tone can convey empathy and understanding. A loud, forceful tone can signal dominance or aggression. And a wavering, uncertain tone can betray nervousness or lack of confidence.
So it's not just what people say, it's how they say it. The tone of voice can add layers of meaning to their words.
Precisely. It's like the soundtrack to a movie. It sets the mood and helps us interpret the action.
Okay, I'm getting the hang of this nonverbal decoding. What other clues should we be on the lookout for?
Let's talk about body language. This includes things like posture gestures and even the way someone is positioned in relation to you. For example, if someone is leaning in towards you, it generally signals interest and engagement. If they're leaning away or turning their body away from you, it could indicate disinterest, discomfort, or even a desire to end the conversation.
So it's about noticing those subtle shifts in body position and how they reflect the speaker's level of comfort and engagement in the conversation.
Exactly. And don't forget about gestures. These can be incredibly expressive and revealing. Open, expansive gestures can convey confidence, enthusiasm, or a desire to connect. Closed, restrictive gestures can signal defensiveness, anxiety, or even dishonesty.
So it's like our bodies are speaking a language of their own, and we need to learn how to interpret those nonverbal signals.
That's a great way to put it, Mike. It's about becoming fluent in the language of body language and understanding that it can often tell us more about a person's true feelings and intentions than their words alone.
This has been incredibly eye-opening, Sarah. I'm starting to see everyday conversations in a whole new light. Like there's this whole hidden layer of meaning that I've been missing out on. It's like upgrading our communication software, going from a basic version to the premium all-inclusive package.
I love that analogy, Mike. It's about expanding our awareness and becoming more attuned to the nuances of human interaction.
Well, Sarah, I have to say this deep dive into active listening has been a real game changer for me. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit of strategies for becoming a better listener and communicator.
Right.
But before we wrap up part 2 of our episode, I want to touch on something that I think is incredibly important, especially in today's world.
Okay, Mike, I'm intrigued. What's on your mind?
We live in a time where it feels like everyone is constantly shouting their opinions and trying to get the last word.
Yeah.
It's all about being right, being heard, and winning the argument. In that kind of environment, active listening can feel almost radical.
It can't. It's like swimming against the tide.
Exactly. But I think it's more important now than ever. If we want to bridge the divides between us, build understanding, and have more productive conversations, we need to reclaim the art of active listening.
You're absolutely right, Mike. Active listening is an act of courage in a world that often prioritizes noise over understanding. It's about choosing to listen, even when it's hard, even when we disagree, even when we'd rather just talk.
It's about creating that space for dialogue, for empathy, for genuine connection, even in the midst of all the chaos and noise.
Exactly. It's about remembering that listening is not a passive activity. It's an act of creation. It's about building bridges, fostering understanding, and co-creating a more compassionate and connected world.
Well said, Sarah.
Yep.
On that inspiring note, we'll wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into active listening. But don't go anywhere. In part 3, we'll explore the incredible benefits of active listening and how it can transform your relationships, your career, and even your own self-awareness.
Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. We're wrapping up our exploration of active listening with Sarah.
Yeah. In the first 2 parts, we talked about what active listening is, why it's so important, and even got into some practical techniques for in becoming better listeners.
Right.
But now I kind of want to shift gears a little and talk about the impact of active listening.
Yeah.
Like, what are the benefits we can expect to see when we really commit to this and become better listeners?
That's a great point. Mike, active listening isn't just about making other people feel good. Although it does do that, it also has this ripple effect, creating positive changes in our relationships, our work, and even our own self-awareness.
Okay.
Let's start with relationships. What's at the heart of any strong, healthy relationship? It's trust, understanding, and that feeling of being truly heard and seen. That's exactly what active listening does. When you practice active listening, you're basically sending this powerful message to the other person. You matter. Your thoughts and feelings are important to me. I'm here to listen without judging and to understand your perspective.
Yeah, it's like giving someone the gift of your undivided attention, which is so rare these days.
Yeah, it really is. It's about making the other person feel like they're the only person in the room, like their voice truly matters. And that creates this feeling of safety, connection, and intimacy that's essential for any strong relationship.
Right.
Whether it's with a partner, a family member, a friend, or even a colleague.
So active listening is like relationship super glue. It helps those bonds become stronger and more resilient. But I'm also curious about the impact of active listening on our professional lives. I know we touched on this a bit earlier, but can you talk more about how being a good listener can actually help us in our careers?
Of course. Active listening helps us build rapport, gather information effectively, and understand different perspectives. These are all such essential skills for effective leadership collaboration and problem solving. All things that are super valuable in any workplace.
Yeah.
Think about it. When you're truly listening to your colleagues, your clients, your boss, you're picking up on valuable insights that you might have missed otherwise. You're building trust and understanding, and you're showing them that you value their input. And that can make a big difference in how you're seen as a colleague, a team member, a leader.
So it's not just some fluffy, soft skill. It's like a secret weapon for success at work.
Exactly. And the best part, active listening is a skill that can be learned and developed just like anything else. It takes practice and intention, but the rewards are huge.
Totally. I'm sold on this.
Okay.
But, we've talked about how active listening benefits our relationships with other people. But what about our relationship with ourselves?
Oh, that's interesting.
Does active listening have an impact on our own self-awareness and personal growth?
That's a great question, Mike. And it's something that often gets overlooked. Active listening can be a really powerful tool for self-discovery and personal growth. Think about it. When we truly listen to others, we're exposed to different perspectives, different ways of thinking and feeling. We start to see the world through their eyes, and that can broaden our own understanding of ourselves and our place in the world.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own beliefs and assumptions and seeing them reflected back at us through the eyes of other people.
Exactly. We might realize that our perspective isn't the only valid one, that there are other ways of seeing things. And that can be incredibly liberating and eye-opening.
I can see that. By listening to others, we're not just learning about them, but we're also learning about ourselves.
Yes. And here's another way active listening helps with self-awareness. When we truly listen to others, we're also tuning into our own internal reactions. We're noticing how their words make us feel, what thoughts and emotions they trigger in us. And that helps us become more aware of our own emotional landscape, noticing those subtle shifts in our mood and how we're responding to the world around us.
It sounds like active listening isn't just about listening to other people, it's also about listening to ourselves. Cultivating that inner awareness that allows us to grow and evolve and become the best versions of ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Mike, active listening is a journey of self-discovery, both in terms of understanding the world around us and understanding our own inner world.
Well, Sarah, this has been an amazing deep dive into the world of active listening. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of just how powerful this skill is and how it can really transform our lives in so many ways.
Me too, Mike. It's been such a pleasure exploring this with you, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to embark on their own active listening journeys.
I'm sure they are, Sarah. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today. And to our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into active listening. We hope you learned some valuable tips and techniques that you can start using today to improve your communication, strengthen your relationships, and maybe even boost your career success. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel for more communication tips and tricks. Thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and wow, are we in for a treat today? We're diving deep into something I think we all want more of in our lives, those amazing, supportive, truly fulfilling friendships. And to help us get there, we've got the incredible Sarah joining us.
So happy to be here, Mike. You know, we talk a lot about romantic relationships, but friendships, they're really the key to a longer, healthier, and happier life, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just like a warm, fuzzy feeling. There's actual science behind it. Studies show that having strong social connections can actually cut our risk of dying early by like 50%. It's basically having this built-in team to help you through all of life's craziness.
It really is. And what's so cool is that those benefits, they're not just for your mental health. Having close friends, it actually helps your physical health too, Less stress, a stronger immune system. It even helps you bounce back faster when you do get sick.
It's funny, we kind of take friendships for granted sometimes. But seriously, think about it. Who do you turn to when you're celebrating something awesome? Or when you just need a shoulder to cry on? It's those friends, right? The ones who really matter.
It is those people. But I think it's important to separate those casual friends, the people you just kind of know from those true friends. Because a true friend, they're not just someone who's fun to be around. They actually care about how you're doing and want the best for you.
Okay, so how can we tell the difference? What makes those ride or die friends so special?
Well, one of the biggest things is that they're genuinely interested in you, It's not about waiting for their turn to talk, but actually wanting to hear about your hopes, your dream, even the stuff you're kind of afraid to share. It's about feeling like they see you, accept you for who you really are, quirks and all.
I get it. It's like they're your biggest cheerleader, but they're also not afraid to call you out when you're messing up, right?
Exactly. Being able to be vulnerable, Emma, without feeling judged, because opening up is scary, let's be honest. But research shows that sharing those personal struggles with a close friend, it actually makes the bond stronger.
You know what? I can totally relate to that. When I moved to a new city, I felt so lost, But then I started hanging out with people from this hiking group and talking about our lives while we were out in nature. It really helped us become close friends fast.
There you go. That's a great example of how doing things together, sharing those experiences, it just creates this deeper connection, wouldn't you say?
For sure. So we know these true friends are super valuable, and being vulnerable helps build those bonds. But the big question is, how do we actually find these amazing people? It can feel pretty intimidating, right? Like, where do you even start?
You're telling me this whole modern world, it can make it harder to find those deep connections. But the good news is, it's not about luck. It's about making a conscious effort.
So we can't just sit back and hope for the best?
Nope. You gotta put yourself out there. Now, I know that might sound scary, but it doesn't mean you have to transform into this super social butterfly overnight.
So baby steps are okay.
Totally. Start small. If you're more on the quiet side, maybe just reconnect with an old friend. That could be a great first step. If you're naturally outgoing, just, pay attention to those moments when you feel a connection with someone. And then take a chance. See if you can turn it into something more.
That takes some pressure off. It's like recognizing those little sparks and then doing something to fan the flames. Right.
I like that. And the important thing is to be yourself, Authenticity, that's what attracts the right people. Share your real interests. Don't try to be someone you're not.
So be yourself, be open to trying new things, and take the initiative. Got it. But let's be real. Sometimes it feels awkward, putting yourself out there. Any advice on how to make it less, cringy?
You know what really helps? Being genuinely curious about other people. Ask questions, listen to their answers, and give them space to talk about themselves. Because let's be honest, people love talking about themselves, right? It makes them feel heard.
Oh, you know what? That reminds me of this thing I read. It said that talking about yourself, it actually activates the same pleasure centers in your brain as food. And get this, sex. So no wonder people enjoy it so much.
You're kidding. So asking questions and being a good listener, it's actually beneficial for both people. Win-win.
That's amazing. So be ourselves, be curious, look for those activities we can share with others. Those are great starting points. But what else can we do to, level up our friend-making game?
Sometimes it's those small, everyday moments that can make a difference. That smile you give a stranger, chatting with the barista, giving someone a genuine compliment, those little acts of kindness, they make you more approachable and might just open the door to a new connection.
I love that. It's like planting little seeds of connection everywhere we go. You never know what might grow.
Right, and sometimes those seeds, they sprout in the most unexpected places. I read this story about a guy who was new in town and felt super lonely, so he decided to walk his neighbor's dog. And that simple act, it led to him meeting all these new people and forming some really great friendships.
Wow, that's a great reminder that even the smallest actions can have huge results. It all starts with taking that first step, doesn't it?
It totally does. And once you've made those first connections, the real magic happens when you start nurturing those bonds. That's how we turn those acquaintances into true, lasting friendships.
Okay, so we've talked about why friends are so important, how to spot a true friend, and some ways to meet new people. But what about keeping those friendships strong, especially when life gets super busy? I feel like that's where things get tricky.
It definitely is. Life throws a lot our way, but don't worry, we've got you covered. When we come back, we're going to dive into the art of nurturing those friendships, so they don't just survive, but they actually thrive, even when things are crazy. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. We're right in the middle of our deep dive into building those awesome friendships that make life better, more fun, and hey, we even learned they can make you healthier.
I'm so glad to be back, Mike. We've done some great work, right? Figuring out why friends are so important and how to start those first connections. But now let's switch gears a bit and talk about how to make those friendships last. That's the real challenge sometimes, wouldn't you say?
I think so. I mean, it's like anything you value, your garden, your car, heck, even a comfy pair of shoes. Got to give them some love and attention if you want them to stay in good shape.
Oh, I love that analogy because it's so true. Friendships, they're like any relationship. They need to be nurtured. Life gets in the way, we get busy, but those little things you do consistently, that's what really matters in keeping those bonds strong.
So give us the goods. What are some practical tips to make sure we're not accidentally ghosting our friends, even when our schedules are packed?
Okay, well, first off, regular check-ins, those are huge. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. Just a quick text to say, hey, thinking of you. Or a voice note sharing something funny that happened. Or even just calling them up out of the blue to see how their week's going. It shows you care, even when you're swamped.
Yeah, it's like saying, hey, you're still on my mind, even with all this craziness going on.
Exactly. Yeah. And don't forget about fun. Make time for those things we both enjoy, whether it's trying that new ramen place everyone's talking about, going to a concert, or even just having a movie night at home. Whatever floats your boat, it shows you're making the friendship a priority.
Makes sense. It's like actually putting it in your calendar, like you would a work meeting, but way more fun.
Exactly. And here's one that I think people often forget. Express appreciation. Those little acts of coldness, remembering what's important to them, actually telling them how much you value their friendship, that stuff goes a long way.
I know. It's funny how we just assume our friends know how we feel, but honestly, hearing those words out loud, it really can make all the difference. Like, I know when I get a heartfelt note from a friend, just appreciating something specific they see in me, it totally makes my day.
Doesn't it? Those little affirmations, they're so powerful. And it reminds me of the study I read. It showed that even small, unexpected gifts, like bringing your friend their favorite coffee or surprising them with a book you think they'd like, it can really strengthen that bond and make them feel super valued.
I love that. Those little I get you gestures, they mean so much. And speaking of going the extra mile, one of the articles we shared for this deep dive told this great story about two friends who lived in different countries. And they had this tradition of sending each other postcards whenever they traveled. Such a small thing, but those postcards, they became this symbol of their lasting friendship.
It's so true. Even when you're miles apart, those little efforts, they bridge the gap and show your friend they're important to you.
So we've got these awesome tools for keeping your friendship strong, those check-ins, fun times, expressing appreciation. But let's be real for a second. Even in the best friendships, disagreements happen, right? And can healthy friendships really survive those conflicts? Because honestly, sometimes it feels like walking on eggshells.
It's true. Disagreements are bound to happen in any close relationship. And healthy friendships, they're not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about learning how to deal with it in a way that's actually constructive. Believe it or not, it can actually make the bond stronger if you handle it right.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I'm picturing those epic friend breakups you see in movies, and that's not exactly inspiring.
Right, but think about it. Haven't you had those arguments with friends where, even though it was tough in the moment, talking it through actually made your friendship stronger in the end?
Oh, totally. Like this one time, my friend and I had totally different ideas for a trip we were planning. We were both being super stubborn. But after some honest conversations, well, maybe a slightly heated debate, we actually found a compromise that worked for both of us. And you know what? Looking back, The trip itself was amazing, but what I really remember is how we learned to work through those differences.
That's it. That's a perfect example of healthy conflict resolution. It's about communicating respectfully, taking responsibility for your part, and really trying to understand each other's point of view instead of just trying to win the argument.
So it's less about being right and more about finding a solution that everyone can live with.
Exactly. And remember, sometimes it's okay to agree to disagree. Not every conflict needs a neat little resolution. The most important thing is to maintain that mutual respect and a willingness to move forward together.
This is great. We've talked about making those bonds stronger and handling those disagreements like champs. But there's another part of friendship that I think can be hard to talk about, you know? What happens when friendships just naturally drift apart? It's like that elephant in the room no one wants to acknowledge.
It is. It's one of those bittersweet things about friendship. But you know what? Sometimes it's perfectly normal for friendships to change and evolve. People grow, our lives change, and it doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong.
I think we put this pressure on ourselves to hold on to every friendship we've ever had. But it's like trying to squeeze into a pair of shoes that don't fit anymore. It's just not comfortable.
You nailed it. And forcing a connection that's not really there anymore, it's not authentic, it's not good for either person. It's okay to recognize that some friendships have a season, and that's all right. It doesn't take away from the value of the time you shared.
It's like those different chapters in a book, right? Some are full of action, some are more thoughtful and quiet, but they all make up the whole story.
Exactly. And by letting go of those friendships that aren't serving us anymore, it actually makes space for new connections to come into our lives. Connections that might be a much better fit for who we are now.
I like that. It's freeing in a way, right? Like giving yourself permission to go with the flow of friendships.
That's the spirit. And with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, wouldn't you say? We've explored how to nurture those friendships, how to handle those tricky disagreements, and even how to let go when it's time. Are you ready to move on to our last part, Mike, where we'll give our listeners some concrete things they can do to put all this into practice?
Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. It's been quite a journey, wouldn't you say? Exploring all the ins and outs of friendships. We've talked about the science behind why they're so good for us, the things that make a true friend stand out, how to make those bonds even stronger, and even how to deal with those, let's face it, inevitable disagreements that pop up sometimes.
It has been quite the journey. And now for the grand finale, we're going to give you some practical tools you can actually use to build and maintain those amazing connections. We've got all this knowledge, but what good is it if we don't know what to do with it, right?
It's like having a fancy new kitchen gadget, but no clue how to turn the darn thing on. So let's break it down. Where can our listeners start to actually put all these insights into action?
Well, we talked about putting ourselves out there, but let's get down to brass tacks. It really starts with being aware of what you're interested in, you know? Think about those passions, your hobbies, the things you've always wanted to try but haven't gotten around to yet.
Okay, so if I've always wanted to learn how to play the ukulele, I shouldn't just dream about it. I should actually sign up for a class.
You got it. Or maybe you're a totally bookworm. Joining a book club, that could be a great way to meet people who love reading just as much as you do. The point is, you got to create those opportunities to connect with people who share your passions.
Makes sense. It's all about finding your tribe, right?
Exactly. Having those shared interests, it just gives you something to talk about naturally, helps you build that connection. And don't limit yourself to just one thing. The more you explore, the more chances you have to meet people you really click with.
So, diversify our social portfolio.
I like it. And if the idea of walking into a room full of strangers makes you want to hide, there are other ways to connect online communities, forums, Facebook groups. Those can be a less intimidating way to start, especially if you're more on the introverted side.
That's good to know. It takes the pressure off, right?
For sure. And honestly, you never know where those meaningful connections are going to come from. I read this story about this woman who started volunteering at an animal shelter, and she ended up becoming really close friends with the other volunteers. That shared love for animals, it turned into something really special.
That's so cool. It just goes to show even those unexpected places can lead to amazing friendships. Got to be open to those possibilities.
Right. And volunteering in general, it's a fantastic way to give back and meet people who care about the same things you do, Whether it's a food bank, mentoring kids, environmental stuff, there's something for everyone.
Awesome. So you found something you enjoy doing, you're putting yourself out there, and you've met some cool people. Now what? How do you go from those initial hellos to a real solid friendship?
That's where all that nurturing stuff comes in. We talked about those regular check-ins, scheduling fun things to do together. But it's more than that. It's about being genuine, being the kind of friend you'd want to have.
So treat others how you want to be treated. The golden rule of friendship.
Pretty much. Be a good listener, be there for them when they're going through tough times, celebrate their successes like they're your own. Remember those important dates and milestones, all those little things. They show you really care about the friendship.
It's funny how those little things can make such a big difference, right? Like, I remember this one time, a friend brought me my favorite takeout after I had a really rough week. It wasn't anything crazy, but it meant the world to me because it showed they were paying attention and actually cared about how I was feeling.
Exactly. Those small acts of kindness, they say a lot. They show your friend that there was just some afterthought, when you're busy with everything else.
It's like saying, hey, you matter to me even when life's chaotic. But speaking of chaotic, how do we manage to make time for friends when we've got work, family, all that stuff going on? It's a constant battle.
Oh, I know. You got to be intentional about it, But one thing that can help is trying to include your friends in your everyday routines instead of always trying to plan these big elaborate outings. Invite a friend to join you for your morning walk or suggest trying a new workout class together,
So find those pockets of time and be creative with how we connect.
That's it. Doesn't have to be a big production every time. Even just grabbing coffee or a quick phone call can do wonders for staying connected.
Makes sense. It all adds up, right? Those little moments keep the friendship going. But even with the best intentions, sometimes disagreements are going to happen. We talked about navigating those conflicts. Any other tips for dealing with those tricky situations?
The key is to approach those conflicts wanting to understand, not to blame, Check your ego at the door and really listen to what the other person is saying.
So it's a we're in this together kind of thing, not you versus me.
Exactly. And communicate. Don't let things fester. If something's bothering you, say it. Calmly and respectfully, of course, focus on how you feel instead of attacking the other person.
That's good advice. But what if you've tried to communicate, but the same issue keeps coming up?
That's when you might need to have a deeper conversation about the friendship itself. Be honest about what you need and what you expect from the friendship. And be open to hearing their side of things too. Sometimes giving each other honest but kind feedback can actually change the dynamic for the better.
I see your point. But what if even after all that, the friendship still feels kind of, one-sided, like you're always the one reaching out or offering support?
That's a tough one, and it takes a lot of self-awareness to recognize when that's happening. Sometimes, even if you've tried your best, a friendship might have just run its course, and that's okay. It's okay to let go gracefully, cherish those memories, but make space for new connections that might be a better fit for you right now.
I think that's important to remember. Friendships, they're like any relationship. They change over time. Sometimes they get stronger. Sometimes they naturally fade. And that's all right. It's all part of life, right?
It really is. And the beautiful thing about friendship is that it's a two-way street. Just like we need to be mindful of who we surround ourselves with, we also got to strive to be a good friend to others, right?
It's about pulling your own weight, being supportive, trustworthy, showing up authentically. It's not just about what you get, but what you give too.
That's the heart of it, being the best version of ourselves so we can have a positive impact on the people around us.
Wow, this has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for being here with us at the Learn English Lab, Sarah. I feel like I've learned so much about the power of friendship.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
And to all you amazing listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into friendships. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We'll catch you next time on the Learn English Lab. Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I'm thrilled you could join us today for this deep dive into something pretty crucial, I think you'd agree, building new skills.
You bet.
And we've got Sarah here to share her expertise on how to navigate this crazy, always changing world where it feels like if you snooze, you lose when it comes to learning.
It's so true. And it's interesting because it's not just about keeping up with the latest tech or whatever. It's really about personal growth, advancing your career and just overall staying engaged and confident in yourself.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So let's unpack that a little bit. What makes continuous learning, always trying to learn new things, so important in today's world?
Well, for one thing, the job market is seriously competitive these days.
For sure.
I mean, there are always new technologies and approaches popping up, and the skills that were in high demand even a few years ago might be totally obsolete now.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that happen myself. Remember when just knowing, basic HTML was this awesome skill, and now it's like, who doesn't know at least a little bit of HTML. It's almost as common as knowing how to use a stapler.
You got it. And if we don't adapt, we risk being left behind.
Missing out on new opportunities.
Totally. Feeling stuck in our jobs, or even worst case scenario, finding ourselves without a job at all.
So continuous learning is definitely not optional, wouldn't you say?
It's essential.
But where do we even start? Like, how do we approach learning new things in a way that's not completely overwhelming and that'll actually help us get somewhere?
Well, the good news is there's a whole bunch of options out there. Traditional stuff like on-the-job training or going to workshops can still be really valuable.
Yeah, you're right.
You get that structured learning environment and often direct feedback from people who really know their stuff.
True. But those can be hard to fit in, with work and life and everything. Plus, sometimes they can be expensive. That's where those online platforms like Coursera or Udemy really shine, I think.
Oh, for sure.
They're super affordable, and you can learn at your own pace, which is great.
Yeah, and it's remarkable how easy it is to access knowledge now, right? I mean, you can literally learn anything from anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's not just about watching videos or taking quizzes. Some of these platforms offer interactive exercises, real-world projects, and even online communities where you can connect with other people who are learning the same things.
That community aspect is huge, I think. Learning by yourself can feel really isolating. But when you've got a group of people, even if it's just online, cheering you on and helping you through those tough spots, it makes a world of difference.
Totally. It's like having a built-in support system to keep you motivated, answer your questions, and just make sure you're staying on track.
And it's not just about those formal ways of learning either, right? Think about all the skills we pick up just by volunteering, reading articles or blog posts about our industry, going to conferences, even just spending a day shadowing someone at work can teach you a ton.
So true. It's about being proactive and recognizing that learning opportunities are everywhere.
Exactly. Just be curious, be open to new experiences, and you'll find a ton of ways to grow your skills. I actually taught myself sign language a while back, using mostly YouTube tutorials, believe it or not.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was surprisingly easy to pick up and really rewarding too.
That's a great example of how accessible learning new skills can be nowadays. You don't necessarily need a fancy degree or an expensive course. It's more about having that drive to learn and finding the right resources.
So we've talked about why continuous learning is important in some ways to go about it. But what about the actual skills, right? Like, which skills should we be focusing on? This is where it gets really interesting.
It definitely does. Things are changing all the time, but there are a few key areas that are probably going to be in high demand for a while.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell us, what are those in-demand skills we should be adding to our toolkit for the future?
Well, first off, digital literacy is absolutely essential these days.
I think I've heard that somewhere before.
Things like AI, programming, and data analysis are becoming increasingly important in pretty much every industry now, from healthcare and finance to education and even the arts.
So even if you're not planning on becoming like a software engineer, having at least a basic understanding of those digital tools is crucial.
Totally. It's becoming the new baseline for navigating the professional world. But it's not just about technical skills. Being able to solve complex problems is another super valuable skill that employers are looking for.
So being able to think critically, break down complex situations, and come up with innovative solutions. Sounds like adaptability is key here.
You got it. And this actually leads nicely into another crucial area, sales and marketing.
Okay, interesting.
In today's digital world, businesses need people who can connect with their customers online, build strong relationships, and tell stories that really resonate.
So even if you're not in a traditional sales role, having those strong communication and persuasion skills is a major asset.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget about the good old-fashioned interpersonal skills. Communication, leadership, and teamwork. These are sometimes called soft skills, but let me tell you, they're incredibly important for success in any field.
I think we all know that one person who's a fantastic listener, who's super empathetic towards their colleagues, and who can handle even the trickiest conflicts with grace and calmness, those qualities are pure gold in any workplace, no matter what you do.
You're so right. And I'd add one more to the mix: flexibility. This goes beyond simply being able to adapt to change. It's about being open to new ideas, willing to step outside your comfort zone, and viewing learning as a lifelong adventure.
So it's not about reaching some kind of finish line. It's more about embracing that mindset of continuous growth and development.
Exactly.
It's exciting, for sure, but maybe a little intimidating too, right?
It can be, but ultimately it's incredibly empowering to know that we have the power to shape our own futures by constantly investing in ourselves and learning new things.
That's so true. I mean, it really is powerful. But I bet some people listening are thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but how do I actually make this happen? There's just so much information out there. It can feel totally overwhelming.
Oh, definitely. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. A good place to start, I think, is by setting realistic goals. Don't try to learn everything at once or become an expert overnight.
Right. So break down those big, ambitious goals into smaller, bite-sized pieces.
Exactly. Think about learning a new language. You wouldn't expect to be fluent after just a couple of lessons, would you?
No way. Takes time.
Yeah. You start with the basics, build a solid foundation, and then gradually work your way up from there.
That makes sense.
And this is actually where finding a mentor can be super helpful.
Yeah, mentor.
Yeah, or just someone who's already mastered the skill you're trying to learn.
Okay, yeah.
They can give you personalized guidance, feedback, that kind of thing. And they can help you stay motivated and focused on your goals.
Having that kind of guide, someone who's already walked that path, would be amazing. But what if you don't have access to a mentor? Are there other options?
Oh, for sure. There are tons of resources available nowadays, online forums and communities can be really great.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those.
You can connect with other people who are learning the same things you are, ask questions, share resources, get support.
It's like crowdsourcing your learning journey.
Yeah.
I love that idea. Okay, so we've set our goals, we've found some guidance, and now we're ready to get started. What's the most important thing we need to do to be successful?
Practice. I know it sounds obvious, but it's honestly where so many people struggle.
Really?
Yeah, you can't just passively absorb information, like watching videos or reading articles, and expect to master a skill. You have to actually roll up your sleeves and put what you're learning into practice.
It's like exercising a muscle,
Yeah.
right? The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
That's a great analogy. And just like with exercise, consistency is key when it comes to building new skills. Even if you can only dedicate a small amount of time each day, it'll make a huge difference in the long run.
So it's about finding ways to incorporate practice into our daily routines in a way that feels sustainable.
Exactly. Maybe you listen to a podcast on your commute, or read a professional development book for a few minutes before bed, or spend an hour working on a coding project. Just find what works for you and make it a habit.
Those little consistent actions really do add up.
You bet. And I think it's important to remember that building new skills is not about reaching some kind of finish line. It's an ongoing process. The world is always changing, and our learning should be too.
So it's about embracing that growth mindset of always learning, always being curious, always challenging ourselves to learn new things.
Precisely. There's a real beauty in that constant evolution. It keeps things interesting and keeps us engaged with the world around us, and that to me is super exciting.
I completely agree. And it makes all the effort totally worth it.
Yeah.
I love that. That sense of always discovering something new and growing as a person. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But one thing that I hear a lot from people is, I just don't have the time to learn new stuff. Life is so busy, and it's easy to put learning on the back burner.
Oh yeah, for sure. Time is definitely something we all struggle with, but I think the key is to remember that even small chunks of time can make a difference.
You don't need to block off hours and hours every day to learn.
Not at all. It's more about shifting our perspective and finding those little opportunities throughout the day where we can sneak in a little bit of learning.
So instead of trying to find big blocks of time, it's more about being intentional with the little bits of time we have here and there.
Exactly. Maybe it's listening to an educational podcast while you're commuting, or reading a few pages of a book about something you want to learn before you go to bed.
Or even spending 15 minutes on Duolingo or something.
Exactly. It all adds up.
Little by little. A little becomes a lot.
Right. You got it. And another thing I think is super helpful is to try to connect the things you're learning to your passions and interests.
Oh, that's a good idea.
If you're learning something new for work, but you're not super excited about it, maybe try to find a way to tie it into a hobby or something you already enjoy. It'll make it way more fun and engaging.
I like that. So for instance, if you're learning about data analysis for your job, but you're also a huge foodie, you could try applying those data analysis skills to, say, analyzing recipes or something like that.
That's such a great example. It's about finding those connections that make learning feel less like a chore and more like a natural part of who you are.
I love it. Well, Sarah, this has been such a great conversation. We've covered so much ground today. I feel like I've learned a ton, and I hope our listeners have too. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Just to embrace the journey of lifelong learning. It's full of possibilities for growth, discovery, and ultimately a more fulfilling life.
That's a fantastic takeaway. Thanks again for joining me today, Sarah. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into building new skills. We hope you found it helpful and inspiring. Remember, no matter where you are in your learning journey, there's always something new to discover and a new skill to master. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel for more insightful discussions and deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and boy, am I excited for this deep dive. We're going to be tackling a question that I know a lot of you have probably wondered about: how to sound like a native English speaker. And to help us unlock this mystery, we've got the amazing Sarah here, our language expert extraordinaire.
Thanks for having me.
So Sarah, what pops into your head when you hear that question? How to sound like a native speaker?
Well, it's a fantastic question, and it really makes you think about what it actually means to really master a language. And honestly, one of the best strategies might surprise you. It all begins with mimicry.
Mimicry. You mean like pretending to be somebody else?
Yeah, exactly. Think of it kind of like an actor getting ready for a role. They watch, they listen, they imitate. And when it comes to learning languages, that kind of total imitation can be super powerful, you know? Instead of just learning the rules, you're actually training your mouth to move in totally new ways to make sounds that you might not be used to.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. How does that actually work when you're learning?
So one of the most important things is focusing on the physical part of speaking. Pay attention to how native speakers move their mouths, their lips, even their tongues when they're making different sounds. You can even use visuals to help you outwatch videos or look in the mirror as you practice. The goal is to build up that muscle memory so those sounds start to feel natural and you don't even have to think about them.
So it's almost like we're rewiring our brains to think in a different language, both mentally and physically.
You got it. You're not just memorizing words and grammar, you're actually developing a whole new way of talking, a new way to express yourself. It's like embodying the language, not just getting it.
That's so cool. But let's be real. Not everybody has the time or the money to just pick up and move to an English-speaking country to fully immerse themselves. Are there any tools or techniques that can help us speed this process up?
Oh, you're totally right. Full immersion is not always possible. But luckily, we're living in a time where technology can give us incredible support. There are some awesome pronunciation apps that can give you personalized coaching, interactive exercises, and even feedback in real time. It's like having a personal language tutor right in your pocket.
So we've got mimicry and technology working together. What else can we do to really get rid of that gap between textbook English and that smooth, natural speech we all want?
I think one of the biggest changes happens when you start thinking in English.
Whoa, hold on right there. This is something I hear a lot, but I feel like people don't really explain it. How do you actually do that? It sounds awesome, but it can be really hard to actually make it happen.
You're right. It's not a piece of cake, but it's super important if you want to stop sounding like you're reading from a textbook. One easy thing you can try is to start narrating your day in English. Describe what you're doing, what you see, what you're feeling all in your head using English.
So instead of thinking I'm making coffee, I'd think I'm brewing a cup of joe.
Bingo! It might feel a little weird at first, but it really helps you break out of that habit of translating everything back and forth in your mind. And the more you do it, the more natural it'll become. You'll just start thinking in English without even realizing it.
That's actually super useful. I love that.
Here's another one that might sound a little strange. Embrace being imperfect.
What do you mean by that?
Don't be scared to make mistakes. Actually, mistakes are your buddies. They're chances to learn and get better. Record yourself speaking English. Listen back and see where you can do better. You'll be shocked by how much you learn just from hearing yourself.
I've never liked hearing recordings of myself, but you're right, it could be a really helpful tool. It's like getting someone else's opinion on how you speak.
Exactly. It helps you catch those little things that you might not even know you're doing. And the coolest part is you can see how much you improve over time. You can literally hear yourself getting better.
All right, so we're mimicking, we're using technology, we're thinking in English, and we're okay with making a mistake. This is awesome. What else makes someone sound like they're a learner versus a native speaker?
A lot of times it's the small things that make a big difference. One of those things is connected speech.
Connected speech, what's that?
It's basically how sounds blend together when people are just talking naturally. Native speakers often kind of mush words together, almost like they're making one long word.
Gotcha. Can you give us an example?
Sure, like the phrase, I'd decide, a native speaker might say, I'd decide, just connecting the sounds. Or friend egg could sound like friend egg, and sometimes sounds even disappear completely, like the T in next week, which becomes next week.
Wow, I never really thought about it like that. It's like a secret language.
It kind of is, and these little connections might not seem like much, but they're what give English its rhythm and flow. It's what makes it sound smooth and natural.
Okay, so how can we get good at this connected speech thing?
Listening is key. Really pay attention to how native speakers connect their words and phrases, and then try to copy them. You can even find stuff online that explains all the rules of connected speech. The most important thing is to practice, practice, practice.
You got it. Practice makes perfect. Or at least makes us better. Speaking of which, we've covered a lot today. From mimicking mouth movements to being okay with mistakes, and even diving into connected speech. It's pretty clear that there's way more to sounding like a native speaker than just memorizing words. What else should our listeners remember as they start trying to sound more like native speakers?
One thing that people often forget is how important intonation is. It's like the music of language, the way we use our voices to show emotion and meaning.
Can you tell us more about that?
Think of it like a song. The way our voices go up and down can completely change what we're saying, just like the notes in music. Stress and rhythm are super important for making English sound lively and interesting.
So it's not just about saying the words right, it's also about how we say them with the right intonation. Makes sense. Any advice for getting better at intonation?
Absolutely. One of the best things to do is listen to native speakers and then copy them. Pay attention to how they use their voices to emphasize certain words or phrases and how their tone changes with different emotions. Speeches, TED Talks, even songs can be really helpful for this.
So basically, surround ourselves with as much spoken English as we can and really tune into those little changes in intonation.
Yep. The more you listen and imitate, the more natural your intonation will become.
Got it. This has been super helpful. I'm starting to understand how all of this works together to create that smooth, effortless flow that makes someone sound like a native English speaker. But let's be honest, sometimes we just want to sound cool to fit in with the locals. Is there a quick way to do that?
Well, if you want to sound like a local, you got to talk like a local. And that means getting into the world of idioms and slang.
Ah, yes. Idioms and slang. Those tricky but awesome expressions that can make you sound like you belong or not.
Exactly. They're like shortcuts to sounding more authentic. They add color and personality to your language, making it less formal and more natural. But of course, with great power comes great responsibility.
I can imagine some of the problems there. Slang can be super specific to a certain situation, right? What's cool to say with your friends might not be cool to say at work.
You're totally right. It's all about using the right words at the right time. And with idioms, you got to make sure you're using them the right way. Otherwise, you might end up sounding confusing instead of cool.
So we're talking about finding a balance. Using idioms and slang to make our language more fun and interesting, but also being aware of the context and not making any big mistakes.
You got it. There are some great resources that can help you figure out idioms and slang, like online dictionaries and forums. But the best way to learn is to listen to native speakers and watch how they use these expressions in different situations.
So immerse ourselves in the language and pay attention to how native speakers use these expressions. It sounds like we keep coming back to that same idea.
You're picking up on the pattern. And here's another important thing to keep in mind. Sounding like a native speaker is more than just pronunciation. It's also about how you deliver your message.
You mean like how fast we talk, how clearly we speak, things like that?
Exactly. It's about speaking clearly and with confidence so people can understand what you're saying. Think of it like the difference between reading a script and giving an awesome performance.
I get it. Being clear and speaking at a good pace is super important for keeping people interested and making sure they understand what you're saying. Are there any exercises we can do to get better at this?
Oh yeah, reading out loud is an awesome way to practice pacing and clarity. Choose a paragraph from a book, an article, or even just something random and read it out loud. Like you're giving a presentation, really focus on speaking clearly and at a natural speed.
So it's like giving a little presentation to ourselves. I can do that. What else can help us sound more like a native speaker?
Well, there's really no substitute for actual conversations. Talking with native speakers is the best way to practice everything we've talked about, to feel comfy with the flow of the language, and to build your confidence.
That makes total sense. But for people who don't know any native speakers, what can they do?
Don't worry, there are tons of resources online that can connect you with native speakers for language exchange or online tutoring. You can find conversation partners, language tutors, even whole online communities that are all about helping people learn and practice English.
That's amazing. So we can create our own little English-speaking world, even if we're not living in an English-speaking country.
Exactly. And the more you chat with native speakers, the more comfortable and confident you'll get. You'll start to pick up on all those little things about pronunciation, intonation, and even body language that really makes someone sound like a native speaker.
I can already feel myself getting more confident just thinking about it. But before we wrap up, is there one last piece of advice you want to give to our listeners who are working on sounding more like native English speakers?
Yeah, definitely. Remember that language is really a tool for connecting with others. It's about building bridges, sharing ideas, and experiencing the world in new ways. Embrace the journey, have fun with it, and never stop exploring how beautiful and diverse the English language is.
That's a beautiful thought, Sarah. Thanks again for being here and sharing your knowledge with us.
It's been fun, Mike.
Okay, so we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into how to sound like a native English speaker. We've learned so much already, and I can't wait to see what else we uncover.
Me too. We've talked about a lot of different things that make someone sound like a native speaker, but it's important to remember that they all kind of work together. Like it's a big puzzle, and every piece is important for seeing the whole picture.
I like that analogy. So how do we put all these pieces together? How do we go from practicing different skills to actually sounding like a native speaker when we're talking to people?
That's where the real magic is. And it all comes down to practicing consistently and not being afraid to use what you've learned. Remember, language isn't just about the rules. It's about connecting with people and expressing yourself.
It's so true. It's easy to get caught up in all the technical stuff and forget that the whole point is to actually use the language. So how do we get over that fear of making mistakes and really start having conversations in English?
Well, first of all, be nice to yourself. Everybody makes mistakes, especially when they're learning something new. In fact, mistakes just mean you're pushing yourself. You're growing and trying new things.
That's a good point. It's easy to feel discouraged when we mess up or feel like we're not improving fast enough.
Totally. But remember, learning a language is a journey, not a race. Celebrate the small things you get right. Notice your progress, and don't be afraid to laugh at yourself sometimes.
I love that. Humor is a great way to make those awkward moments less awkward and turn them into something you can learn from. But speaking of learning, what are some practical ways we can get more practice talking with native speakers?
Surround yourself with the language as much as possible. Listen to podcasts, watch movies and TV shows, read books and articles, all in English, of course. The more you hear and see English, the more natural it will start to feel. And don't just be a passive listener. Sing along to your favorite songs, repeat phrases you hear in movies, even talk to yourself in English.
Those are great tips. Sometimes we forget how much we learn just by being around the language. But what about actually having conversations? How do we get comfortable speaking in English, especially if we don't know any native speakers?
There are so many awesome resources online that can help you connect with native speakers for language exchange or online tutoring. You can find conversation partners, tutors, even whole online communities dedicated to helping people learn and practice English.
That's fantastic. So we can basically create our own little English-speaking world, even if we don't live in an English-speaking country.
Precisely. And the more you talk with native speakers, the more comfortable and confident you'll become. You'll start to notice all those little things about pronunciation, intonation, and even body language that truly make someone sound like a native speaker.
I can already feel my confidence growing just thinking about it. But before we finish up, is there one last piece of advice you would give to our listeners who are working on sounding more like native English speakers?
Yes, absolutely. Remember that language is all about connecting with other people. It's about building relationships, sharing ideas, and seeing the world in new ways. Enjoy the process, have fun, and never stop exploring the beauty and diversity of the English language.
That's a beautiful way to put it, Sarah. Thanks again for sharing your wisdom with us.
My pleasure, Mike.
All right, so here we are at the final part of our deep dive into sounding like a native English speaker. It's been an awesome journey so far, and I'm really curious to see where we end up.
Me too.
I know what you might be thinking. Okay, I've heard all these tips. I'm ready to use them, but where do I even begin?
Yeah, it can feel a bit overwhelming at first.
It really can.
But remember what we talked about. Start small, pick like 1 or 2 things that really clicked with you and just concentrate on those.
Right. You don't need to do everything all at once. It's all about finding what works best for you and making your own way of learning.
Exactly. Maybe you really like the idea of mimicking how people move their mouths, so spend some time watching videos and paying close attention to how native speakers make those sounds.
Or maybe you're really into tech, so try out some of those pronunciation apps and see if they help you improve your accent.
Yeah, the important thing is to make it fun. If you're enjoying what you're doing, you're way more likely to stick with it.
Definitely. And don't be afraid to be creative. Put on your favorite English song and try to sing along, really listening to the rhythm and how the singer's voice goes up and down.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or grab a book and read out loud, focusing on speaking clearly and at a good speed.
The more you surround yourself with English, the easier it will be to make it feel natural.
And as you start to feel more confident, go ahead and reach out to those online communities and talk to native speakers.
Those communities can be so helpful and encouraging. Everyone's learning just like you, and they want to help each other out.
Exactly. Speaking of learning, I think it's important to remember that this isn't something you just finish one day. It's a journey that keeps going.
It really is. There's always something new, to learn a new accent, to try out a new way to say what you want to say.
That's what makes it so exciting. And you never know, you might even inspire someone else to start learning English too.
You're absolutely right.
So to wrap up this amazing deep dive, let's go over some of the most important things we've learned.
Okay.
Mimicry technology, thinking in English, being okay with making mistakes, connected speech, intonation, idioms, slang, real-life conversations. We've covered so much.
We really have.
And it all comes down to this: be curious, be adventurous, and never stop exploring the English language.
I love that.
You've got this. Every step you take brings you closer to speaking English fluently and naturally.
Well said.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into sounding like a native English speaker.
It's been a great conversation.
I hope you've enjoyed listening and that you feel inspired to keep learning English.
Me too.
Remember, the learning never stops. So keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep having fun with English. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab YouTube channel for more deep dives into the awesome world of English fluency. We'll catch you next time. Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and today we're diving into how to speak English, fluently and confidently.
I'm Sarah.
It's great to have you here, Sarah. You're a real pro when it comes to learning languages.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
So for everyone listening, you've decided to boost your English skills. That's awesome. And we're not just talking about textbook stuff, We're talking about speaking smoothly and naturally, like a pro.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the biggest things holding people back is, well, the fear of making mistakes. It can be scary to speak up when you're not totally sure you're getting it right.
Right.
But here's the thing. Even native English speakers, we mess up sometimes. We trip over words, mix up tenses. It happens. What matters most is getting your ideas across.
Totally. And you know what? Research actually shows we learn better when we're not afraid to slip up. Think about how kids learn language. They just dive in, trying out sounds and phrases. It's that fearlessness we want to recapture.
That's such a good point. It's about shifting our focus from being perfect to just communicating, right?
Yeah, focusing on connection.
Okay, so speaking of shifting gears, have you ever heard of this idea of thinking in English?
Absolutely. It's a total game changer for fluency. Instead of translating in your head, you start forming thoughts directly in English. It's like rewiring your brain for smoother, more spontaneous communication.
It sounds almost magical, but how do we actually do that? Like, how do we put it into practice?
Well, there are some really simple things you can try. Start by narrating your day in English, just in your mind. I'm brushing my teeth, I'm making coffee, I'm walking the dog, just creating a running commentary in English.
So instead of just going through the motions, I'm actively thinking about those actions in English.
Exactly. You can also try commenting on your thoughts and feelings in English. This song is beautiful. I'm feeling stressed today.
Interesting. So basically, I'm becoming my own English-speaking narrator.
Precisely. Another helpful thing is to describe objects you see around you. That's a red apple. This chair is comfy.
I can see how all these small things could add up.
They really do. You're creating this constant flow of English in your mind.
Now let's talk about how we sound when we speak English. Pronunciation's important, right? But I've got to say, I love accents. They add so much character to someone's voice.
Me too. Your accent is part of you. It's something to celebrate, not erase.
But are there certain sounds that are really tough for English learners?
Yeah, for sure. It depends on your native language. For example, Spanish speakers often find the f sound tricky, while Japanese speakers might struggle with the L and R sounds.
It's fascinating how our native language influences how we hear and make sounds in another language. So it's not just about learning the sounds themselves, it's like retraining the muscles in our mouths to make them.
Exactly. It's physical as much as mental.
All right, so as we're retraining those muscles and starting to think in English, how do we actually build our vocabulary and, speak in full sentences?
One really good strategy is learning phrases, not just single words. Instead of just memorizing beautiful, you might learn, that's a beautiful sunset, or you have a beautiful smile.
So it's like learning those ready-to-go chunks of language I can use in different situations.
Right. It makes your learning more efficient and helps you sound more natural.
I'm already feeling more confident. So to really sound like native speakers, what about idioms? Those quirky expressions that make the language come alive.
Idioms are awesome. They can be tricky at first, but they make you sound like you've really got a handle on English.
Yeah, like break a leg, which of course doesn't mean to actually break your leg. It means good luck. Or piece of cake, which doesn't involve any cake, but means something is easy.
Great examples. Idioms add humor and color to your English, but it's key to learn them in context and use them the right way.
So where do we find these idioms? I'm guessing movies, TV shows, music are all good places to start.
They are. Immersing yourself in real English content is one of the best ways to learn idioms naturally. Don't be afraid to write them down and try using them in your conversations.
Love it. It's like turning entertainment into a learning opportunity. What about podcasts, especially those made for English learners?
Podcasts are such a great resource. They cover tons of topics and styles, and many are designed specifically to help learners.
I like podcasts that have transcripts so I can read along as I listen and catch any words I miss.
That's a great tip. And some podcasts have exercises or quizzes to test your understanding, which can be really helpful.
Okay, we've got movies, TV shows, podcasts, so many great resources. But what about the ultimate immersion experience? Moving to an English-speaking country.
Living in an English-speaking environment can really speed up your learning. You're constantly surrounded by the language, forced to use it every day. You pick up nuances you might not get in a classroom.
It's like a 2047 language program, but it's also a big decision, not something everyone can do.
Totally. So what if you can't just pack up and move? Are there ways to create immersion while you're traveling?
That's a great question. What do you suggest?
You can totally create an immersive environment right where you are. It's about finding ways to engage with English in your daily life.
Like what specifically?
For example, you could find an English-speaking job or volunteer somewhere where English is the main language.
That's a great way to use your skills and get experience at the same time.
Exactly. Another idea is hosting travelers in your home through websites like Couchsurfing or Airbnb.
That's a fun way to meet people from all over and practice in a casual setting.
And it can be a great cultural exchange.
Of course, we can't forget about technology. There are tons of apps, websites, even just switching your phone settings to English can help.
Tech is definitely a helpful tool. You have dictionaries, translation apps, online platforms, but it's important to find a balance between online learning and real-life interaction.
I agree. While apps are great for vocab and grammar, it's crucial to practice speaking with actual people.
Exactly.
You know, speaking of practicing, here's a cool tip. It might sound a little strange, but trust me, use a mirror to practice speaking out loud.
A mirror. Tell me more.
I know it might feel silly, but it's actually really effective. You can see your own facial expressions, body language, even your mouth movements, which helps you see where you need to improve.
I see, like having your own personal coach.
Exactly. Plus, you can practice different situations. Giving a presentation, ordering food, having a conversation.
That's a safe space to experiment.
Right. So as we finish up this first part of our deep dive, I want to stress something super important for success in language learning: consistent effort and patience.
Couldn't agree more. It's not about overnight transformations. It's about making steady progress over time.
And celebrating those little victories along the way, right?
Absolutely. Each new word, each conversation, each time you understand a native speaker, those are all wins.
Exactly. It's all about those small wins adding up to big fluency gains.
And remember, setbacks happen. It's okay to have days where you feel stuck. Just get back on track and keep going.
Persistence is key. Ready for the next round of tips?
Absolutely. I'm excited to share more strategies.
So we've covered a lot, from thinking in English to, creating that immersive environment. Now let's get into some specific techniques to really level up those speaking skills.
I like that. Having a toolbox of techniques can be so helpful.
For sure. Let's start with something called shadowing. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. Shadowing is a great way to improve pronunciation, intonation, even your rhythm.
Sounds kind of mysterious. What is it exactly?
Basically, you're mimicking a native speaker, almost like you're their shadow. You listen to a recording and try to repeat exactly what they're saying, matching their pace and intonation.
So it's like synchronized speaking.
Exactly. It might feel a little awkward at first, but it's amazing for internalizing the sounds and rhythms of natural English.
Makes sense. So I'm not just listening, I'm actively engaging with the language, trying to reproduce it.
Yes, and that active engagement is key. It helps you develop muscle memory, for those sounds and intonation patterns.
So how do I actually do it? Just pick any recording and start repeating?
Well, it's best to start with something short and clear at a pace you can comfortably follow. A podcast, a news report, even a scene from a movie.
Got it. Something manageable.
Right. Repetition is key. Listen, pause, and then try to repeat exactly what you heard. Focus on the sounds, the intonation, even the pauses.
Breaking it down and really focusing on those details.
Yes. As you get more comfortable, you can try longer recordings, more complex ones. Even try shadowing different accents to hear the variety in English pronunciation.
Cool idea. So shadowing is for pronunciation and fluency. What about self-recording? That sounds a bit like talking to myself.
It is a bit like that, but self-recording lets you go back and really listen to yourself, which can be super insightful.
That makes sense. It's hard to judge yourself while you're actually speaking, With self-recording, I can hear how I sound to someone else.
Exactly. You could pick a topic you're interested in, maybe something you've been learning about, and just record yourself talking about it for a few minutes.
Then listen back and analyze it.
Yes. Pay attention to your pronunciation, grammar, how smoothly you speak, your overall clarity. Listen for any mistakes you keep making, any spots where you get stuck.
It's like being my own language coach.
Right. You can also use it to track your progress. It's motivating to see how much you've improved.
I love that. So we talked a bit about practicing with other English learners, but I think it deserves more attention.
Totally. It's so valuable. It creates this safe, supportive space where everyone's in the same boat.
It definitely feels less pressure than talking to a native speaker, especially when you're just starting out.
Absolutely. And you learn so much from each other, sharing tips, strategies, resources. You can even do role-playing together.
And you don't feel as bad about making mistakes because everyone's doing it.
Exactly. Plus, it's fun to connect with others going through the same thing.
So how do you find people to practice with? Are there online communities or groups?
Oh, tons. You could join a language exchange group online or in person. That way you can connect with people learning English who are also native speakers of your language.
Language exchange groups are great. You help each other, it's a win-win.
There are also English conversation clubs at libraries, community centers, sometimes even universities. Often, they're free, and they have a structure for practicing.
Great ideas. And then there are online forum and communities specifically for language learning.
Exactly. You'll find people at your level who want to practice. The key is to be proactive, put yourself out there.
Now let's talk about something that could be a game changer. Your mindset. How you think and feel about language learning can really impact your progress.
Oh, 100%. Mindset is huge. If you believe you can learn English, you're way more likely to succeed.
It's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Exactly. It's not just about believing you can do it. It's about embracing the whole process, the challenges too.
Because learning a language isn't always easy. There will be times when you feel frustrated, maybe you want to give up.
That's normal. Everyone feels that way sometimes. The key is not letting those feelings stop you.
So how do we create a more positive mindset? What are some practical tips?
Well, start by setting realistic goals. Don't try to do too much too soon. Start small, then gradually make things harder as you progress.
I like that. Baby steps.
Another important one is focusing on your progress, not your mistakes.
It's easy to get hung up on those mistakes and feel discouraged.
It is, but remember, mistakes are normal. They're actually how we learn and grow.
So instead of beating myself up, I should see them as feedback, showing me where to improve.
Exactly, and don't forget to celebrate your wins, no matter how small they seem.
Yes, those little wins add up and keep you going. What are some other ways to stay positive and motivated on this journey?
Surrounding yourself with positive people can make a huge difference. Connect with other learners, share experiences, encouragement.
Having a support system is so important. What about finding resources that inspire you? Like a favorite podcast, a YouTube channel, maybe a book about language learning.
That's a great idea. Those resources can give you a boost, especially when you're feeling stuck.
And they often offer practical tips.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you and creating a learning environment that feels good and motivating.
Before we move on, I want to talk about self-compassion.
Self-compassion, so vital. It's being kind to yourself, especially when you mess up or things get tough.
Because let's be real, learning a language can be hard. It's easy to be tough on yourself.
Especially when you compare yourself to others or to, some ideal of a perfect speaker.
So true. But everyone learns at their own pace.
And everyone has strengths and weaknesses. So instead of being hard on yourself, be patient.
Offer yourself the same kindness you offer a friend who is struggling.
Yes. Recognize that you're human, and this takes time, effort, and a lot of self-love.
So we've covered active learning techniques like shadowing and self-recording, the power of practicing with others, and having a positive mindset. Ready for the final stretch?
Bring it on.
Awesome. We've focused on internal strategies, but now I want to talk about external things you can do to create an environment that supports your learning.
Love that. Our environment plays a huge role in our success.
It really does. Okay, let's start simple. Surround yourself with English.
Immersion, immersion, immersion.
Exactly. Now, we talked about living in an English-speaking country, but there are tons of ways to create that immersion right where you are.
Absolutely. Find those opportunities to expose yourself to the language as much as possible.
So what are some practical ways to do that?
One of the simplest is changing the language settings on your devices to English. Your phone, computer, tablet, everything.
That's so smart.
It is. It might feel weird at first, but you adapt quickly. You're constantly seeing English, even if you're just checking email or scrolling through social media.
It's like passive learning in the background. And then there's English music and podcasts.
Music and podcasts are amazing, entertaining, and educational.
And there's something for everyone. Whether you're into pop, classical, true crime, comedy, you'll find something you enjoy in English.
And you can listen while you do other things like commute, workout, even chores.
Multitasking for language learning.
Exactly. And don't forget about movies and TV shows.
Ah, the classics. They're great for listening comprehension, and you learn different accents, slang, cultural stuff.
And with all the streaming services, there's so much to choose from.
And subtitles can be really helpful, especially when you're starting out.
Absolutely. As you get better, you can try turning them off or even use English subtitles to reinforce your reading.
Good strategy. Okay, what about reading?
Reading is so important for building vocabulary, understanding grammar, seeing different writing styles.
And it can be really relaxing.
Totally. What are some of your favorite things to read in English?
I love novels and short stories. They're immersive. You get lost in the story.
And there are so many genres to choose from. What about nonfiction?
Nonfiction is great too. You learn about new topics and build vocabulary in specific areas. History, science, business, anything you're interested in.
And English news websites and blogs are great for staying up to date and seeing different writing styles.
And for practicing reading comprehension.
Yes. So we've talked about passive immersion, but what about actually speaking English in your daily life? That's where it all comes together.
Absolutely. It's one thing to understand, but using it in real life is where the magic happens. So how do we create those opportunities?
Well, joining an English conversation group is a great way to start. We talked about them before, but they're worth mentioning again.
For sure. They're relaxed, supportive, and often led by experienced teachers who can give feedback.
Finding a language exchange partner is another good option.
Language partners are great. You help each other practice in a more personalized setting.
And it's fun. You connect with someone from a different culture.
Now let's talk about something that can be intimidating, but also really rewarding. Putting yourself in situations where you have to speak English with native speakers.
That's where the real growth happens.
It's where you test your skills, see how far you've come, and really experience the language in action.
It can be nerve-wracking, but it's also super motivating.
So what are some tips for handling those situations?
Well, remember, everyone makes mistakes. It's part of the process.
Native speakers get that you're learning, and they're usually patient.
Start small. Don't try to have a super complex conversation right away.
Like ordering food, asking for directions, making small talk with a cashier, those everyday interactions.
Exactly. And let people know you're learning.
That's a good point. Most people are happy to help. They might even slow down or use simpler language.
Right. And don't be afraid to ask if you don't understand something.
Way better to ask than to pretend you get it.
Exactly. And remember, making mistakes is okay. Don't let fear stop you from speaking.
The more you speak, the better you get. Okay, let's talk about travel, the ultimate immersion experience.
Ah, travel. There's no better way to immerse yourself in the language and culture.
You're constantly surrounded by English, so many chances to practice.
Any tips for making the most of travel for language learning?
First, choose a place you're genuinely interested in.
Makes sense. If you're excited about the place, you'll be more motivated to talk to people.
And don't be afraid to go beyond the tourist spots.
Love that. Explore those less touristy areas. You might meet locals who don't speak English as well, which can be a good challenge.
And it's a more authentic experience.
Think about doing activities that involve speaking English. A cooking class, a guided tour, maybe even volunteering.
That gives you a structured setting to practice, and you'll be with people who are also interested in learning or sharing their culture.
Exactly. And just chat with people at cafes, restaurants, shops, museums. Ask for recommendations, share stories.
Those casual conversations can be so memorable.
They really can. Before we wrap up this section, let's talk about support.
Support is crucial. Learning a language can be tough. It's so much easier with people who encourage you.
Absolutely. How do you find that support?
Connecting with other learners is huge. We've talked about this, but it's worth repeating.
Definitely. Whether it's an online forum, a conversation club, or even just chatting with other learners, those connections are valuable.
You share experiences, tips, encouragement. You learn from each other's mistakes.
And celebrate each other's wins.
What about finding a mentor or tutor?
Mentors and tutors are amazing. They give you guidance, feedback, encouragement.
And they keep you accountable and motivated. They can offer a different perspective, too.
What about support from family and friends?
They can be the best cheerleaders.
Even if they don't speak English, they can still be supportive, encouraging, and help create a good learning environment at home.
Exactly. They can help you make time for studying, be patient when you're frustrated, and celebrate your successes. Having that support makes a world of difference. So let's talk about common mistakes English learners make and, more importantly, how to avoid them.
I love that idea. Knowing those common pitfalls can help us stay on track.
For sure. So let's start with one I see all the time. Translating word for word from your native language.
Ah, the word-for-word trap. So tempting, but it can make your sentences sound really unnatural.
It can. English grammar and sentence structure are different from other languages, so those direct translations don't always work.
And it makes it harder to think in English, which we talked about earlier.
How do we avoid falling into that trap?
Focus on learning phrases and chunks of language, not just individual words.
We talked about that, but it's worth repeating. Seeing language as building blocks, not isolated words.
Yes, when you learn phrases, you're internalizing the grammar too, not just the words.
It's like learning in context, which makes it stick better.
Another tip is to pay attention to how English actually sounds. The patterns, the rhythm.
That natural flow native speakers have.
Right, listen to how they phrase things, where they emphasize words, how they connect ideas.
And don't be afraid to imitate them. Mimicry is a great learning tool.
It is. The more you hear real English, the more you'll internalize those patterns. Okay, another common mistake. Being afraid to speak.
Oh yeah, the fear of speaking. A big roadblock for a lot of learners.
It's understandable. Putting yourself out there can be scary, especially when you're not confident.
But it's like learning to ride a bike. You can't just read about it, you have to actually do it.
Exactly. And the more you speak, the easier it gets.
What are some tips for getting over that fear?
Find a safe, supportive place to practice.
Like a conversation group, or even just a friend or family member who'll listen and encourage you.
Right. Find people who won't judge you and will support you.
And remember, everyone makes mistakes. It's how we learn.
The key is not letting those mistakes stop you. See them as learning opportunities.
Don't be afraid to start small. You don't have to jump into a big, complicated conversation.
Exactly. Start with greetings, introductions, simple, everyday phrases.
And as you get more confident, you can make your conversations longer and more complex. Okay, let's talk about another mistake. Focusing too much on grammar.
The grammar trap. It's easy to get so caught up in the rules that you forget the main goal, which is communication.
So true. Grammar is important, but it shouldn't be the only thing you focus on. How do we find that balance?
Remember that fluency is about communicating effectively, even if your grammar isn't perfect.
So it's okay to make a few mistakes as long as people understand you.
Exactly. Even native speakers make grammar mistakes.
That's true. It's more about the overall flow and clarity.
And don't be afraid to experiment.
I like that. Try out new words, even if you're not totally sure if you're using them right.
The more you experiment, the more you learn. You'll start to get a feel for how the language works.
Now let's talk about using language that's too formal.
Ah, yes, the textbook English problem. It's easy to sound stiff and unnatural, especially if you've learned mainly from textbooks.
Textbooks are good for the basics, but they don't always reflect how people really talk.
So how do we avoid sounding like a textbook?
What are your thoughts?
Listen to how native speakers actually speak. Pay attention to the phrases, the tone, the flow.
Movies, TV shows, podcasts, even listening to conversations at a cafe can help.
Totally. And don't be shy about using those phrases yourself.
Another tip, practice speaking in different contexts.
Great idea. Instead of just formal stuff, try role-playing different situations.
Like ordering coffee, asking for directions, chatting about your weekend.
Those real-life situations help you develop a more natural way of speaking. And don't forget about contractions.
Ah, contractions. Those make English sound so much more natural.
Exactly. I'm going to instead of I am going to. Can't instead of cannot.
Small changes, big difference. Okay, another mistake, not asking for help when you need it.
It's easy to feel stuck or embarrassed about not knowing something.
But everyone needs help sometimes.
Absolutely. Asking for help shows that you're serious about learning and that you're not afraid to ask for guidance.
So if you're struggling with grammar, pronunciation, or just need someone to practice with, don't hesitate to ask.
Talk to a teacher, a tutor, a language exchange partner, even a friend or family member who's good at English.
There are lots of people who are happy to help.
And last but not least, be patient with yourself.
Patience is crucial.
It's a journey, not a race. Fluency takes time and effort.
It's easy to get discouraged when you don't see results right away, but remember, it's a gradual process.
There will be ups and downs, plateaus, times when you feel like you're not making progress.
Just trust the process. Be kind to yourself.
Celebrate those small wins and take breaks when you need them.
Every little bit counts. So we've talked about common mistakes like translating word for word, fear of speaking, focusing too much on grammar, using formal language, not asking for help, and impatience. And we've discussed ways to avoid those pitfalls.
Knowing those common mistakes can really make a difference.
Absolutely. Before we move on, I want to touch on one more thing, making learning fun.
Fun is so important. When we enjoy it, we're more likely to stick with it.
So true. And there are so many ways to make it fun.
What are some of your favorites?
I always try to find resources that match my interests.
I love that. If you like music, listen to English songs.
Right. If you like movies, watch English movies and TV shows. If you like reading, read English books.
It shouldn't feel like work. It should feel like a hobby.
Another tip, set yourself little challenges.
Challenges are fun, like learning 5 new words every day or watching a whole movie without subtitles.
Those challenges keep you motivated and make it more rewarding. And games.
Games are awesome for learning English.
They are. There are so many online, in app stores, even in textbooks.
And they make learning feel like playing.
Exactly. You can practice vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation without feeling like you're studying.
Try using English in creative ways in your daily life.
I love that, like writing your grocery list in English.
Exactly. Or have a little conversation with yourself in the shower in English.
Or narrate your day in your head in English.
Find those little chances to use English every day.
And don't take yourself too serious.
That's so important. Laugh at yourself, make mistakes, just enjoy it.
Learning a language should be joyful.
It should. Embrace the journey, find what you enjoy, and have fun with it.
Ready for the grand finale.
Yes. Bring on the final words of wisdom.
Okay, so we've covered a ton in this deep dive. Practice, immersion, mindset, common mistakes, making it fun. Before we finish, I want to leave you with some key takeaways.
Love those. They help solidify those important lessons.
So let's start with one we've been talking about all along, consistency.
Consistency is key. It's not about studying for hours all at once. It's about making English a regular part of your life.
Exactly. Even a few minutes a day makes a difference.
Find a routine that works for you and stick with it.
Listen to a podcast, read a few pages of a book, chat with a language partner. Those consistent efforts really pay off.
And it's okay to have off days.
Life happens. There will be times when you can't stick to your routine.
Don't beat yourself up. Just get back on track as soon as you can.
Don't lose sight of those goals. Another key takeaway, embracing mistakes.
Mistakes are our friends. They're learning opportunities.
So true. Instead of seeing them as failures, see them as stepping stones.
Every mistake teaches you something new.
And brings you closer to fluency.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Learn from them and keep going.
Another important one, finding your voice.
Finding your voice. I love that.
It's about embracing your own personality and style as an English speaker.
You don't have to sound like a textbook, lose your accent, or be perfect.
Be yourself. Express yourself authentically and confidently.
And find the joy in it.
Let your personality shine through, have fun, be creative.
And one more, celebrate your successes.
Celebrating is so important. It's easy to focus on the challenges and forget how far you've come.
Take time to appreciate your progress, no matter how small.
So every new word, every conversation, every time you understand a movie without subtitles, celebrate.
Pat yourself on the back, treat yourself, share your excitement with someone.
Those celebrations keep you motivated.
They do. Before we wrap up, I have one final thought.
Ooh, a final thought. Love it.
Learning English is more than just a new skill.
It's about opening up new possibilities.
Exactly. Connecting with people, exploring new ideas, expanding your world.
It makes your life richer.
So embrace the journey, be patient, and never stop learning.
Beautiful. Sarah, it's been awesome having you on the show.
Thank you. It's been great sharing these tips.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. Remember, you've got this. Keep practicing, keep learning, and never give up on your dreams.
And if you liked this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more great tips on mastering English. See you next time.
Until then, happy learning. It's like having a built-in cheerleader, you know? Someone to help you stay motivated and remind you why you started this journey in the first place.
Exactly. And speaking of creating a supportive environment, let's talk about something we've touched on before, immersion. How can our listeners really immerse themselves in English, even if they're not living in an English-speaking country?
Yeah, what are some creative ways to make that happen?
Well, one super simple thing is to change the language settings on all your devices to English. Phone, computer, tablet, the whole shebang.
That's a sneaky good one. You're constantly exposed to English without even realizing it.
Exactly. You might feel a little lost at first, but you'll be surprised how quickly you adjust. Plus, you're passively absorbing new vocabulary and grammar every time you use your devices.
It's like learning on autopilot. And of course, we can't forget about all the fun stuff, movies, TV shows, music, podcasts.
Oh, absolutely. Not only are they super entertaining, but they're also a goldmine for authentic language input.
There's literally something for everyone, whether you're into action movies, romantic comedies, historical dramas, documentaries, you name it. You'll find something you enjoy in English.
And don't underestimate the power of music. Listening to English songs is such a fun way to pick up new words, work on your pronunciation, and just, vibe with the language.
Plus, you might discover some amazing new artists. Speaking of expanding your horizons, what about reading?
Reading is essential for any language learner. It's like a workout for your vocabulary, grammar, and overall understanding of how the language works.
And just like with movies and music, there's a whole universe of English literature out there to explore.
Totally. Classic novels, contemporary thrillers, biographies, self-help books, anything you can think of, you'll find it in English.
I love getting lost in a good book. And it's even better when it's helping me learn English at the same time.
And don't forget about news websites and blogs.
Yeah. Those are great for staying up to date on current events and for seeing different writing styles.
Plus, I often cover a wide range of topics, so you're bound to find something that interests you.
Okay, let's shift gears for a bit. What about putting yourself in situations where you have to speak English with native speakers? That can be a little scary, but also super exciting.
It's definitely where the rubber meets the road. It's your chance to put everything you've learned into practice and see how far you've come.
It can be nerve-wracking, for sure, but also incredibly rewarding.
So any tips for approaching those situations with confidence?
Well, remember that everyone makes mistakes. Native speakers understand that you're learning, and they're usually super patient and encouraging.
It's true. Most people are happy to help.
Another tip, start small. You don't have to jump into a deep conversation right away.
Exactly. Simple things like ordering food, asking for directions, or making small talk with a cashier are great starting points.
And as you get more comfortable, you can gradually work your way up to more challenging conversations.
And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you don't understand something. It's way better to ask than to pretend to get it and miss out on important information.
So true. Now, what about travel? For a lot of people, that's the ultimate immersion experience.
Oh, absolutely. Traveling to an English-speaking country is like diving headfirst into the language and culture.
It's a fantastic way to practice your speaking skills, interact with native speakers, and make memories that will last a lifetime.
Any tips for making the most of travel for language learning?
Well, first and foremost, choose a destination that really speaks to you, a place you're genuinely excited to explore.
Makes total sense. That passion will make you even more eager to connect with people and use your English.
And don't be afraid to go beyond those typical tourist hotspots. Venture off the beaten path a bit.
I love that. You're more likely to meet locals who might not be as fluent in English, which can be a great challenge.
And you'll get a more authentic experience of the culture.
For sure. Another tip, plan activities that involve speaking English, like taking a cooking class, joining a guided tour, or even volunteering.
Those kinds of activities provide a structured setting for practicing your speaking skills and connecting with people who share your interests.
Exactly. All right, as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with some final thoughts that I think are absolutely key for achieving fluency and confidence in English.
Ooh, I'm all ears.
First things first, remember that learning a language is a journey, not a destination. There will be bumps along the way, challenges, setbacks, but also incredible moments of growth and discovery.
It's all about the process and enjoying the ride.
Exactly. Be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and never, ever give up on your dreams.
And remember, making mistakes is not a failure. It's a sign that you're learning and growing.
It's all part of the process. Embrace those mistakes. See them as stepping stones to fluency.
And most importantly, find joy in the journey.
Yes. Find what inspires you, what makes you excited about English, and let that passion fuel your learning.
Beautifully said, Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today.
The pleasure was all mine, Mike. I've loved sharing these tips with your listeners.
And to all of our amazing listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into how to speak English fluently and confidently. Remember, you've got this. Keep practicing, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more awesome tips and tricks to help you on your English learning journey.
We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, happy learning. Welcome back to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I'm super excited to be chatting with Sarah today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Sarah, you're a real expert when it comes to communication.
I try my best.
So today we're going to dive into a topic that I think, honestly, kind of freaks a lot of us out.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Starting conversations with strangers, like how do you even...
Right. It can be scary, but I think for a lot of people, it's that fear of the unknown. You know?
Totally. Like, what if they think I'm weird or something?
But here's the thing. It really is a skill you can learn. And the more you practice it, the easier it gets, I promise.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better already. But where do we even begin?
I'd say the most important thing is confidence.
Confidence, huh? Even if you don't exactly feel it.
Even if you have to fake it a little bit at first. Because seriously, when you act confidently, your brain starts to catch up.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It's kind of like you're tricking your mind into believing it.
So it's like that whole fake it till you make it thing.
Exactly. And I've seen it work wonders, I'm telling you.
I like that. I guess it's kind of like the saying action cures fear, right?
Oh, 100%. The longer you hesitate, the more time you have to overthink things.
And overthinking never leads to anything good.
Oh, definitely not. Especially when it comes to social situations.
Right. Like you said, it's that fear of what other people are thinking.
Which, let's be honest, is often way more in our heads than reality.
So true. We build up these scenarios in our minds that probably never even happen.
People are usually way too focused on themselves to be judging us as harshly as we think.
Okay, that's good to remember. So confidence is key. But what's like a practical first step to actually get a conversation going?
A friendly greeting goes a long way. Seriously.
Like what? Just, hi.
Well, yeah. But with a genuine smile, make eye contact, introduce yourself quickly, maybe even offer a handshake.
Keep it simple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm friendly and approachable.
I like that. Straightforward and to the point. Okay, but how do you keep a conversation going once you've broken the ice? Any tips to avoid those awkward silences?
Having a few questions ready can be a lifesaver, trust me.
So do your homework.
Sort of. Just think of a couple of things you could ask beforehand. That way you're not, scrambling for something to say in the moment.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of questions that usually work well?
Oh, tons. I mean, even something as simple as asking for directions or recommendations can be a great way to start chatting.
Like, hey, do you know a good coffee shop around here?
Exactly. Or is this your first time at this event? Just something to get the ball rolling.
Simple but effective. I like it.
What's really key is to ask open-ended questions.
Open-ended?
Yeah. Instead of questions that just get a yes or no answer, try to ask things that encourage the other person to actually talk a bit more.
So instead of, is it cold out today? I could say, what do you think of this crazy weather we've been having?
There you go. You're giving them a chance to share their thoughts.
And people love to share their thoughts, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. And, there's a reason for that.
I'm all ears.
It's not just about ego, people just wanting to talk about themselves. It's actually deeper than that. When we share our experiences, it helps us feel seen and heard.
Whoa. So it's like a fundamental human need.
Exactly. It validates our existence and helps us connect with others.
I never thought of it that way. So it's not just about getting them talking. It's actually fulfilling a basic human need for connection.
You got it. And that's why, even more than asking the right questions, it's so important to be a good listener.
Oh, for sure. Actually paying attention to what the other person is saying.
Yep. Make eye contact, nod along, ask follow-up questions, show them you're genuinely interested.
So you're creating a space where they feel comfortable sharing.
Exactly. You're building that bridge of understanding between you two.
That's beautiful. So we've got the open-ended questions. We're being good listeners. What else can we do to keep a conversation flowing smoothly?
One thing that can really help is looking for common ground. It's amazing how even something tiny can spark a connection and make a conversation feel more, comfortable.
Like what? Give me an example.
It could be anything. The weather, the music playing in the background, even just a shared observation about the event you're both at.
Oh, I see. Hey, we're both experiencing this together.
Exactly. It's an instant bond.
So it doesn't have to be some deep philosophical thing.
Nope. Sometimes the simplest things are the best conversation starters. And another thing, don't be afraid of a little silence.
Silence.
Yeah. It's okay if there's a pause every now and then.
But isn't that the ultimate awkward moment?
Not necessarily. Sometimes people just need a moment to think, It can actually be a good thing.
Like a chance to take a breath.
Exactly. And don't put so much pressure on yourself to be perfect. It's a conversation, not a performance.
Oh, that's a good point. I definitely get caught up in trying to say the right thing sometimes.
We all do. But honestly, it's the imperfections that make conversations interesting.
You know what? I think you're right. So embrace the awkward moments.
Absolutely. And even if a conversation doesn't go perfectly, it's still a learning experience. Every interaction helps you get a little bit better for next time.
So it's all about viewing those so-called failures as stepping stones to success.
Yes. Think about it. Every athlete, musician, artist, they all had to practice for hours and hours, making tons of mistakes along the way before they got really good.
Wow, that's a great analogy. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up if every conversation isn't a home run.
Exactly. Each interaction is valuable data. It helps you refine your approach and build your confidence over time.
I'm really starting to see the power of this mindset shift. Instead of fearing failure, we can actually learn from it.
Now you're getting it. And honestly, not every conversation has to be some deep, meaningful exchange. Some will be amazing, some will be a bit awkward, and that's okay.
So the key is to just keep practicing and keep learning.
Exactly. And have fun with it. That's the most important part.
Speaking of making a good impression, have you found that compliments can be a good way to break the ice?
Oh, they can be fantastic. But the key is to be genuine.
What do you mean?
Well, you want to avoid those generic compliments that could apply to anyone, Instead of just saying, nice shoes, try something more specific like, those shoes are so unique. I love that color.
So it shows you're actually paying attention.
Exactly. You're acknowledging something that you genuinely appreciate about them.
That makes sense. And what's a good way to keep the conversation going after a compliment?
You could ask a follow-up question, like, where did you get those shoes? I've been looking for something similar.
I see. It keeps things flowing naturally.
And it shows that you're truly interested in what they have to say. And you know what else can really help make a conversation more enjoyable?
What's that?
Humor. A little bit of laughter can go a long way.
Oh, absolutely. A well-placed joke or a funny observation can really lighten the mood.
Totally. But of course, there's a fine line between being funny and being offensive.
Right. You don't want to cross any lines.
So be mindful of the context, the person you're talking to, their cultural background. You want to make sure the humor is appropriate for the situation.
So read the room.
Yeah. But even if you're not, like, a comedian, you can still use humor in subtle ways. A playful tone of voice, maybe a self-deprecating comment, even just laughing together at an awkward moment, those things can create a connection.
I like that. It takes the pressure off.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, authenticity is key.
People can spot a phony a mile away.
Right. So just relax, be yourself, and let your natural charm shine through.
This has been so insightful already, Sarah. You've given us so much to think about.
I'm glad you think so.
Before we wrap up part 1 of this deep dive, do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
You know, one thing that I think is super valuable when you're trying to start conversations is learning to read social cues.
Social cues? Like, what do you mean?
It's all about paying attention to the nonverbal signals people are sending, like their body language, their facial expressions, all that.
So like being a human lie detector.
Not exactly. It's more like tuning in to those unspoken messages that can tell you a lot about how someone is feeling.
Okay, I think I get it. So like, if someone's got their arms crossed and they're not making eye contact, that probably means they don't want to chat, right?
Exactly. That could be a sign that they're feeling a bit closed off or maybe just not in the mood to socialize.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
So what are some other things we should be looking for?
Well, on the flip side, if someone's smiling, making eye contact, maybe even leaning in towards you when you're talking, those are good signs that they're open to a conversation.
So it's all about reading those little hints.
Yep. And it's amazing how much you can learn about someone just by paying attention to their nonverbal communication.
I never really thought about it like that. So reading social cues helps us figure out who to approach.
Right. And also how to approach them.
Oh, interesting. So like adjusting your style based on how they're acting.
Exactly. Some people are more outgoing, some are more reserved. You want to kind of match their energy, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. So if someone seems really shy, I probably shouldn't come on too strong, Red.
Probably not. You want to be more gentle, maybe ask some open-ended questions to get them talking.
And if someone's super chatty and energetic?
Then you can be a bit more playful and energetic too. Just feel the vibe and go with it.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's like being a social chameleon.
Huh. In a way, yeah. It's all about being adaptable and reading the situation.
This is great stuff, Sarah.
Thanks, and remember, everyone's different, so there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. There's no magic formula.
But the more you practice, the better you'll get at reading people and adjusting your style accordingly.
And the less scary it'll feel, right?
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of people, it's that fear of the unknown that really holds them back.
Oh, definitely. But you know what? Not every conversation has to be a masterpiece.
Wait, really?
Seriously, some will be great, some will be awkward, and that's totally normal.
I guess it's like anything else in life.
Exactly. You can't hit a home run every time.
Okay, that makes me feel better. So even if a conversation doesn't go perfectly, it's not the end of the world.
Nope. It's just a learning experience.
So we shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes.
Not at all. Embrace the stumbles, learn from them, and move on to the next conversation.
I think that's a really important point. Because I know I tend to overanalyze things after a conversation that didn't go well.
We all do it. But honestly, the more you practice, the less you'll worry about those little slip-ups.
I like that. So it's all about progress, not perfection.
Yes. And remember, even if you only have one amazing conversation out of 10 attempts, that one connection could be life-changing.
Whoa, that's a powerful thought. So don't give up after a few awkward encounters.
Exactly. Keep practicing, keep learning, and who knows who you might meet along the way.
Speaking of awkward encounters, I think one thing that holds a lot of people back is the fear of rejection.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Like, what if someone just totally blows me off?
Well, first of all, remember, it's not always personal.
Wait, what? How can it not be personal if someone doesn't want to talk to me?
Well, maybe they're having a bad day, or they're super busy, or they're just not in a social mood.
So it doesn't necessarily mean I did anything wrong?
Nope. It could be a million different things that have nothing to do with you.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. But it's still kind of hard not to take it personally. You know?
No, I totally get it. But the key is to just shrug it off and move on.
Don't dwell on it.
Exactly. Focus on the next opportunity to connect.
Easier said than done, but I'll try.
And remember, the more you put yourself out there, the less power that fear of rejection will have over you.
So it's like facing your fears.
Kind of. It's like building up an immunity to it.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Because it does feel kind of scary sometimes.
It's normal to feel that way. But trust me, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
I'm definitely seeing a pattern here. Practice, practice, practice.
You got it. And even if things don't always go perfectly, it's all part of the learning process.
You've been so helpful, Sarah. I feel like I'm starting to get a handle on all this.
I'm happy to hear that. And one thing I always tell people is that conversation is a journey, not a destination.
Oh, that's deep. What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's something you keep learning and refining throughout your whole life.
So there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely. And the more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
So what are some practical ways we can, incorporate all this stuff into our daily lives?
Well, challenge yourself to strike up a conversation with at least one stranger every day.
Every day.
Yeah, it could be anyone. The barista at your coffee shop, someone in line at the grocery store, whoever.
So just be more open to those random interactions.
Exactly. The more you do it, the more natural it will feel.
This is really eye-opening. I'm starting to see the world as, one giant conversation playground.
I love that because that's what it is, There are so many opportunities to connect with interesting people if we just open ourselves up to it.
I never thought of it that way before. It's actually kind of exciting.
It is, and you never know what amazing things might happen when you step outside your comfort zone and strike up a conversation with someone new.
Well said, Sarah. This has been an incredible conversation.
Thanks, Mike. I've really enjoyed it.
I know our listeners are eager to hear more, so we'll be right back with the final part of our deep dive into starting conversations with strangers after a quick break. And we're back, still diving deep into the art of chatting with strangers.
Always happy to talk about connection.
So Sarah, in these last few minutes, let's get really practical, okay?
Sounds good to me.
Imagine you're at a networking event, surrounded by people you don't know. How do you actually use all this advice we've been talking about to strike up conversations?
Well, first off, remember those basics we covered earlier. Confidence, smiling, making eye contact. All those things really do make a difference.
They set the stage.
Exactly. Then look for those little opportunities to approach people. Maybe there's a group that seems open and welcoming. Or maybe you spot someone standing alone looking a little lost.
Sometimes I think we assume people standing alone want to be left alone.
You're right about that. Sometimes they're the ones who need a friendly face the most.
Makes sense.
You could even just say something like, "Hey, these events can be a little overwhelming. Mind if I join you?"
That's a good one. Simple and disarming.
And once you've broken the ice, remember all those great conversation starters we talked about? Ask them about their work, their interests, even just their thoughts on the event itself.
And don't forget those genuine compliments.
Oh yes, compliments are a fantastic way to show you're paying attention.
I really enjoyed your presentation earlier. Something like that.
Perfect. Just remember to be specific. Avoid those generic phrases that could apply to anyone.
Okay, got it. So we've talked about networking events, but what about more casual, everyday situations? Like at a coffee shop or in line at the grocery store.
Same principles apply.
Yeah.
Look for those little openings, those shared moments that can spark a conversation.
Like if you see someone reading a book you love.
Exactly. Or maybe they're wearing a shirt from your favorite band. Use those things as springboards.
I think a lot of us overthink it. We worry about bothering people or interrupting them. But honestly, most people are pretty open to a little friendly chat.
I agree. I think we tend to underestimate how much people actually crave connection.
It's all about taking that first step.
Right. Exactly. And who knows what amazing conversations and connections are waiting out there.
I love that, Sarah. Well, this has been such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me.
And to all our amazing listeners out there, remember, practice makes progress. Don't be afraid to put yourselves out there. And most importantly, have fun with it.
And if you're looking for a little challenge, try picking one tip from today's episode and commit to using it this week. You might be surprised at how easy and rewarding it can be to strike up conversations with new people.
I love that challenge. So to wrap things up, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics. And be sure to share this episode with your friends so we can help spread the joy of connection far and wide.
Thanks for joining us on the Learn English Lab. Keep those conversations flowing, and we'll see you next time.